Most of them out here with a few tips so you won't waste any points when spending your requisition in Chaos Gate Daemonhunters. In your first few missions, you won't be able to choose any after battle rewards, but starting on day 30, you'll get your first Grandmaster report, allowing you to unlock after battle rewards, and then every 60 days after that, you get another Grandmaster report, allowing you to unlock more different types of item rewards and higher tiers. Before you get to your Armoury Choices, you'll get a conversation dilemma. In the first Grandmaster report at day 30, if you choose the bottom option, you'll actually get +1 requisition to spend in the armory. Unless you're able to get 10 requisition before day 30, you won't be able to unlock all of the requisition categories immediately. If you really want to min-max it and you're very confident in your ability in battle, you can also send back knights to Titan before the first Grandmaster report. You'll get +1 requisition per knight you send back to Titan, but the knights will be lost permanently. Having a couple of extra requisition will allow you to unlock an additional reward category. Because you can only level up these reward categories once per report, that means that you'll get access to tier 3 in that category 60 days sooner. When I played my first campaign, having no idea how common requisition points are, basically just took any items that I thought would be useful or powerful. And there's nothing really wrong with that approach, but if you're trying to min-max, it's good to understand that at first, you're only going to have access to the lowest level, the level 1 mastercrafted items. And later in the game, once you have access to level 2 and 3 mastercrafted items, you're going to completely replace most of those weaker level 1 items. You might think that you should just save all of your requisition points for the Grandmaster reports, unlock those tier 3 weapons as fast as possible, and don't waste any points on tier 1 items. But it's not quite that simple. In some cases, there may be a higher level version of a particular item, but many of the weapon and armor rewards appear to be unique with their own special properties. So although a tier 2 or tier 3 armor or weapon may have higher raw stats, it may not have a specific property that you can only get on a lower tier weapon or armor. When fully upgraded, a 4-strike from the Conviction Dual Falchions has plus 70% chance to crit. Although Conviction's only tier 2 and only does 5 base damage, I wasn't able to find a higher crit chance on any tier 3 weapon. So Conviction was my best choice for delivering reliable crits. In most cases, I'd still say you can pretty safely assume you're going to replace most tier 1 items, but I'll go through each category of item and just highlight some specific items you might want to look out for and some reasons why you might want to keep access to the lower tier for a bit longer. Ideally, by the first Grandmaster report on day 30, you'd have 10 requisition and be able to unlock level 1 in each of the requisition categories. However, it's more likely you'll only have 7 or 8 points, so you'll have to prioritize which categories you want to take first. My strategy is to always put my first point into knight requisition. This will raise your chance of being offered a knight as a reward for your missions from never to always, but you'll only ever be offered the lowest tier of knight levels. This is great value because the lower tier knights only cost 1 requisition to take them as a reward, and if they don't turn out to have a good unique passive that works into the build that you're planning for them, you can send them back to Titan to immediately be refunded the 1 requisition. So it's essentially free for you to sample as many knights as you want until you find one that you want to keep. You can raise this later if you want. Once you get a sufficiently high level, you'll start being offered higher level knights as rewards. Purchasing these higher level knights from the mission reward screen can cost 2 or even 3 requisition. However, if you decide to send them back to Titan, you'll get back that 2 or 3 requisition, so you'll still be able to try them out for free. However, if you do get a knight with a really good passive, if he's higher level, it's more likely that he'll start off with skill choices that you don't want. So once you have 1 point in knight requisition, you might want to just leave it at level 1. And I'd recommend that you focus on maxing out all of the other requisition categories before you come back to raise this to level 2. Do note though that unlocking knight requisition on the first report will mean that one of the other categories of items is going to be delayed in getting those tier 3 weapons. If you're supremely confident that you can survive up to day 90 with only your original starting knights, you could pass up knight requisition to take one of the others. Although the tier 1 ranged weapons may not be that powerful, bear in mind that in order to get the tier 2 and 3 weapons as early as possible, you need to be putting a point into ranged requisition every single time. I won't go through every single ranged weapon, but obviously if you're focusing on a ranged heavy build with lots of purgators, you'll want to invest in some of the heavier weapons. If you're going to make a lot of use of the support fire ability, you'll want weapons that have upgrades giving plus damage to specific enemy types, like plus damage to organics, mechanic or demonic, or plus stun via upgrades. Support fire always does 2 damage or 5 when upgraded, regardless of the ranged weapons base damage. However, additional specific damage types and additional stun via upgrades will add on to support fire. If you're going more for a melee stun execution build, one of the best ranged weapons you can get is the Soul Hammer. When fully upgraded and using your Cybolt shot, does 4 stun per shot. This allows you to easily overcome enemies' stun threshold and set it up so that a melee character can go in and get that execute to refund an action point for your whole team. Some tier 3 Stormbolters can do 7 or more damage in one shot, whereas the Soul Hammer only does 4 damage, but lower damage on a stun weapon is actually good so you don't kill the enemy before you overcome their stun threshold. If you're going for some sort of all-ranged build, then obviously you want higher base damage. When you get access to tier 2 and 3 melee weapons, you want to start keeping an eye out for good weapons. Again, most of the tier 1 weapons are fairly weak and probably not worth spending a point on, particularly if you're not sure you're going to have 8 Requisition by the time the next Grandmaster report comes around. Tier 2 weapons start getting good, and particularly if you're focusing on a melee interceptor as your main killer, you probably want at least 1 good weapon. If you're focusing on killing multiple weak enemies, then a weapon with high base damage is going to be good. If you're focusing more on executes, I'd be particularly looking for weapons with stun and crit. A high crit weapon will enable you to harvest seeds and disable enemy abilities fairly reliably without having to rely on Hammerhand. Later on, you can get some quite exotic weapons that give you AoE attacks like a grenade, autos that give you back action points on a critical hit, or that give you extra action points on an execution. And this also stacks with the Chaplain's extra AP on executes. In terms of armor, extra move speed is always really powerful. Although you do get more powerful versions later, if you get the chance to pick up a tier 1 plus movement speed armor, I'd probably grab it. Any armor with an extra passive Wargear slot is really attractive, as this will allow your Grey Knight to take a grenade and take a plus willpower Wargear. Particularly for Justicars and Librarians, extra willpower is really important. Purgators can take talents that gives them up to 2 extra ammo for grenades. There's also a starting talent that you can get that gives you +1 ammo for equipped grenades. So if you equip 2 different types of grenades, you can get 4 ammunition with each of them. Then you can get armor with even more ammunition for grenades. For librarians and apothecaries, you might want something like Warp Scorn that has warp suppression. This means that your warp surge doesn't increase when you're using psychic abilities. But I actually prefer armors that just give you more willpower so you can cast more. For the apothecary, there's an armor that lets you use health instead of willpower that essentially lets them keep casting and casting forever. They can just heal themselves whenever their health gets low. Passive Wargear and grenades are different from other items in that they are infinite. Once you've got that particular passive Wargear item, you can give copies of it to all of your knights if you want. Also, once you get a tier 2 or tier 3 version of that Wargear item, that will completely replace the lower tier version. So in a sense, if you eventually get the tier 3 version of a passive Wargear or grenade, you'll essentially have wasted the requisition that you spent on a tier 2 version. However, there are at least 2 pieces of passive Wargear that appear in the tier 1 loot tables, but don't actually have an item tier and don't appear to have a higher tier version. You might want to grab those if you can. There are a host of different weapon and item properties available, and I definitely haven't covered every combination of knight skills and complementary weapon choices, but hopefully this has given you a bit more information to help you decide whether or not to spend that valuable requisition